Alan and Sean here from the Prancing Pony Podcast, welcoming you to the Tolkien Experience Podcast.
The Tolkien Experience Podcast is an attempt to bring the fan and scholarly communities together around our shared passion, the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Each episode features a notable scholar or member of the fan community sharing their Tolkien experience.
And now we'll send you over to Sarah and Luke.
Thanks, Alan. I'm Luke Shelton.
And I'm Sarah Brown.
Every other week, we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guest to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you. So without any further delay, let me introduce our guest. For this episode, I had the privilege of sitting down and talking to Janet Brennan Croft. She's the editor of Mythlore, which is an open-access, peer-reviewed journal that focuses on J.R.R. Tolkien and the other Inklings. All issues of Mythlore are available online through Southwestern Oklahoma State University. In addition to her work as an editor, she's also been involved with the publication of several books. The one that she wrote herself is titled War in the Works of J.R.R. Tolkien, and for that, she won the 2005 Mythopoeic Scholarship Award for Inklings Studies. She's also edited a collection entitled Tolkien and Shakespeare, and she helped co-edit Perilous and Fair, Women in the Works and Life of J.R.R. Tolkien, which is an absolute must-have. In addition to her excellent scholarship, she also serves as a librarian at Rutgers University. I am thrilled to sit down and talk with her about her Tolkien experience, so without further ado, let's get to the interview. So Janet, could you please tell us how you were first introduced to Tolkien's works?
Okay, well, I first ran across The Hobbit in my public library at about the age of 6 or 7, and I read it over and over and over again. Take it out, read it, take it back, a couple weeks later, take it out again. That was the only work by him that was in the children's section at that time, and I didn't realize that the Lord of the Rings was a real thing and not just part of the fictional frame of The Hobbit until I saw the paperbacks on a cousin's bookshelf. So I had to finagle a way to get around my library's age limit for adult books, but I managed to get them out and read them when I was 11. And from then on, I reread Lord of the Rings annually for many years and read everything else of his that came out as soon as I could get my hands on it.
Wow. I can't imagine not being allowed to read a book because of the age requirement. My parents always kind of helped me get around that.
I think they would have let me. I mean, I had been a user of that library since I was 6, and everybody knew me there. And the age limit for adult books was 14, so it wasn't that far off. But, I was very proud of myself for figuring out how to work the system.
Yeah. Is that your fondest memory of reading Tolkien's work, or does another one stand out to you more?
Well, I think the fondest memory that stands out to me, well, it is actually tied in with the first reading. It was the first time I read The Lord of the Rings. It was summer and we were off school and I could read all day long if I liked. So I just gulped these things down. And I forever associate the Battle of the Pelennor Fields with lying half hidden under the branches of this white wedding ring spirea bush at my parents' house in Pennsylvania. And just, gulping that chapter down and then looking up and like, oh, I'm not on a battlefield. I'm still lying here under this bush. But I'd have to say after that, it was discovering the Mythopoeic Society. And this was just a whole gathering of people who would get every single Tolkien reference that I made and found nothing strange about attending scholarly papers all day and then playing golf and bowls at night. That led directly to my continuing work as a scholar and editor, as well as to many close, lasting friendships and even love.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's really remarkable to me how we often form kind of those sense memories about our first reading of a book.
Yes.
Like, I can still remember when I first read The Lord of the Rings, I was sitting in a science classroom. And so I remember like the feel of the like fireproof tables in that classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes, there's a powerful scene and you look up and it's just, after that, it's all part of the same memory.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about your involvement with the Mythopoeic Society, and I know that that's where you do a lot of your scholarly work. Do you think that the influence of that society and your scholarly work has influenced the way that you approach Tolkien's work over time?
Yeah, I think it has. Just being exposed to all of the scholarship that comes into Mythlore, and then, when I'm preparing things for publication and I'm following out to what these authors refer to, and it takes me out to all kinds of areas, not just Tolkien, but theorists that I've never really encountered before. Oh, I've got to find out a little bit about this so I can edit this paper intelligently. I'm also on the scholarship award committees for the Mythopoeic Society. So each year I'm reading at least skimming about 20 to 30 books each in the categories of general fantasy scholarship and Inklings Scholarship, and then narrowing it down for a close reading of 5 books each in those categories. So it's over the years it has really broadened what I can call on as a scholar myself. I can remember, oh, this person wrote this article about this, and they referred to this book, and that sounds like just what I need for this paper, so I'll go back and find that.
Yeah.
And the society is just, even just casually, it's fabulous for going and having discussions with people. We have our online, we have our Facebook, we have our mailing list, but it's the conference that really makes it, because you go there and you're just immersed in Tolkien and the Inklings and fantasy and all kinds of related topics for that whole, 3-day thing, and a little bit more if you're on the board because you come in early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like it's a really enjoyable time, and I had the opportunity to go in 2018 to the Atlanta MythCon, and I had a great time as well.
Mm-hmm.
I did want to ask kind of a more specific question for your experience, because probably you have 2 works that might be the most recognizable for listeners. You have the Perilous and Fair collection that you helped edit that focused on Tolkien and the women in his life and the women in his works.
Mm-hmm.
You also have a monograph and several other articles and writings about war in the works of Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was curious, did either of those areas of focus for you specifically influence the way that you read an element or another in The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit?
Yeah. Well, the war thing, the whole interest in war in Tolkien came about tangentially. It wasn't Tolkien at first. I was working in a small college library in Tennessee, and one of my colleagues said, "We don't have enough material in World War I here. Please buy some stuff." So I bought these books, and I got down to reading one, Paul Fussell's The Great War in Modern Memory. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, wait a minute, Tolkien was there. Tolkien went through the war. Tolkien is one of the authors he should be considering, because Fussell's book is all about what was the literary response to World War I. And, so I was telling my friend about this and just kind of bending your ear about it. And she said, shut up and start writing. So that got me on this path of thinking about Tolkien and war. And that colored my readings of all of his works for quite some time. I was looking for, okay, where is he talking about war? How is he depicting war? What's the effect of war on his characters? What's the effect in his own life, going back to his letters and biography? For a long time, that really was the main lens that I was using to look at Tolkien. And in fact, I just finished co-editing a new collection on Tolkien and World War I called Something Has Gone Crack, with a young lady named Annika Rottinger, and it's just out from Walking Tree Press. And the interesting thing we did with that was we were really trying to include contributions from outside of the U.S. and England, get some other perspectives on the war, bring in some new voices. So we're very pleased with the way this collection turned out. It's got some really good established scholars. It's got Tom Shippey, it's got John Garth, but it's also got some new up-and-coming people who are taking entirely different perspectives to it. So, we're waiting for feedback and reviews to see what people think about that. Tolkien and women was another thing that was also, that kind of came out a little bit from the war work. One of the early papers I had in Mythlore talked about war brides in Tolkien. I thought, this is interesting. I really only touched very briefly on women in war in my first book, and this is a whole thing I haven't really thought about. And that kind of led to this project with Leslie Donovan of collecting papers on Tolkien and women. The other thing that influenced that was, as editor, I got so many submissions from people who had not read the existing scholarship and thought they were saying something totally new about Tolkien and war or Tolkien and women that nobody had thought of. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. You need to go back to this paper. You need to go back to that paper. This ground has been covered. I want to see you doing something new with it. And I was recommending the same papers over and over again. So Leslie and I got together and said, well, let's put these in a book that we can just say, go look at this book and read these papers and then come back and tell me where that's leading you with women and Tolkien. Because there's been some really fabulous foundational work, some classic articles that go back. There's nothing... It's hard to find something entirely, totally, 100% new in Tolkien studies. It's been around for a long time. There's a foundation of excellent scholarship. And we're at the point in the field where you have to go back and look at that and build on that if you're going to say something new.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you say that, because I have done that exact thing with Perilous and Fair many times to friends or colleagues that want to talk about Tolkien and women. It's like, okay, there's a book for this. Here it is. Go read it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All these people say there are no women in Tolkien, or come on, read this. He hated women. No.
And what you were saying about Mythlore rings very true for me too. Even when I was starting my PhD, looking at young readers of Tolkien, I was like, there's really not that much out there. But then finally getting through the bibliography of Mythlore that you had put together at that time, and going, oh, well, Tisa Ho wrote about the childlike hobbit in the 1980s, and so I should probably go back and look at that. And yeah, there were all kinds of articles there that I was unaware of until I started digging around in the bibliography and actually getting some of the hard copies and pulling out the bits of articles where it had been addressed before.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that was helpful to you. I mean, as a librarian is my profession, so anything I can do to help people find stuff better, that satisfies the other part of me, the librarian part. So getting that, that huge Mythlore Index Plus that keeps growing with everything that we publish, that's something that I am just as proud of as I am of my scholarship.
So I've officially gotten us off on a tangent about scholarship instead of talking about Tolkien's primary works. So maybe I can redirect us with the next question, which is, what is your favorite part of Tolkien's work?
I've lived with it so long that it's hard to pick out something, I have to say that I feel just kind of a little thrill every time I get to Ithilien. And that one phrase that stands out, the disheveled dryad loveliness of it. But that's just that one little phrase. But I have to say, something that I've been thinking about recently. Verlin Flieger gave 2 addresses this year, one at the opening of the Morgan exhibit and one at MythCon, that have made me appreciate some things about Tolkien that I haven't really thought about a lot in recent years. First, at the Morgan, she talked about how Those of us who have lived with Tolkien's works for decades come to see the world through Tolkien-tinted glasses. And it's really true. Analogies from Tolkien's work almost subconsciously inform how I think about so many things. I mean, like, what would Aragorn do in this particular leadership crisis at work? Can I channel Elrond to keep this committee meeting on track and make sure that everybody's, being heard with respect? And I'm not even thinking that. It's just in the back of my mind as a model of this is how a committee meeting should go. What beauty is there in this autumnal view that I'm having outside my patio window right now? Even when I'm like cutting mushrooms up for dinner and I'm savoring the smell and I'm sneaking taste, I'm thinking, this is a good Hobbit meal right here. So there's that perspective on the world. These Tolkien tinted glasses that Verlin talked about, that long acquaintance with his work gives to us. And then in her MythCon address, Verlin worked through a powerful metaphor about Tolkien as a person and a creator that I'm finding seeping into how I look at other people as well. So she pictured him as the keystone of an arch made up of its contradictions, like his Catholicism and his respect for paganism, his pessimism versus his enjoyment of life. This is the same man, as she put it, who could write both of Niggle's eucatastrophic purgatorial journey and of Smith's deeply sorrowful farewell to Fairy. So as the keystone, he holds all of these oppositions in this highly creative and productive tension. And the more I think about his example, the more I'm seeing that this is a good way to appreciate the contradictions in anyone and even in myself. That's, again, it's the Tolkien tinted glasses. I can use these examples from Tolkien and think, oh yeah, that's how this is working. That's what this means.
I am always in awe of Verlin Flieger's keen eye and observations. She puts things so succinctly and clearly that I get envious sometimes.
Yeah. My friend David Emerson says that she's pointing out stuff that we already know is there, but she points it out so beautifully and so clearly, and you smack your head and say, "Why didn't I see that?"
So with these new appreciations of Tolkien's work, and then going back to your previous experiences with Tolkien's work, that leads us to the last question, which is, do you ever recommend Tolkien's work to others?
Oh, yes, I do. I don't necessarily recommend the movies, the Jackson movies. If you're the type who really wants some visuals to hang things on, Fellowship of the Ring, but I wouldn't go much farther than that myself. They kind of go off the rails, but the works themselves, the books, there's so many pleasures in the books. For the receptive young reader who wants to be a writer, especially, you can absorb so much about the mechanics of writing, about pacing and description and building up and releasing tension, about using dialogue to reveal character, and about just having this breadth of vocabulary. I mean, the amount of times I ran to the dictionary when I was a kid reading these books for the first time. You learn about realism in world building and how realism is a great base for fantasy, working from that base of reality, but the kind of things you have to know to make it real, the geography, the botany, astronomy, all that goes into it. And it also sends you out to these other influences on Tolkien, to history, literature, folklore, mythology. For the right kind of reader, it becomes a kind of a framework for self-education. You find yourself reading about this stuff that you never would have encountered before. And then coming to it as an adult, I think you'll find so much that is apt for past and current political situations. There's a lot there that you can look at and say, this is an interesting analog to what's going on here or what happened there. And how does Tolkien resolve it? Or does he even? Or does he say that it's not really resolvable? I had the opportunity yesterday to talk with a Tolkien scholar that's been around for a while and just recently retiring. And we were talking about Tolkien as a moral guide. He starts these books with moral decisions. I mean, Bilbo has to make this moral decision. Do I act as a proper host and feed these people who have descended on me? I mean, it's one of the first things that happens in the book. And then do I fulfill my contract and run after them and all that? So working through these moral decisions with characters the whole way through all these books helps you make decisions yourself when you find yourself in a situation that might have an analog or a parallel, or you might see yourself, oh, I'm being Bilbo in this situation, so I should do this.
Because it speaks to you at different ages, and it speaks to you in different ways at different ages.
Mm,
And so that makes me wonder,
yeah.
does that change the way that you recommend it to different people? Do you talk about it differently to a child when you recommend it to them versus when you recommend it to an adult?
I think possibly yes. A child is going to be interested in the adventure, in the headlong activity of what's going on. I was thinking about when I read it when I was young. I didn't think the Scouring of the Shire was interesting. I thought it was boring and anticlimactic, and I wanted to get back to the elves and the battles and the mountains and the eagles and all that. And that's what's interesting for a child. This whole world building. They're being exposed to these mythic patterns, these very resonant scenes and so on, and getting this vocabulary of medieval literature and so on and so forth. And it's a cracking great adventure. And that's what the young reader is probably going to be responding to more than what you would see as an older reader, where you might be paying more attention to the politics and the interpersonal dynamics. And another thing that Verlin pointed out was it's a tragedy. So as an adult, you're looking at the Scouring of the Shire, and you're looking at Frodo and his PTSD, and the great melancholy of the whole ending and everything. The fading of the elves, leaving Middle Earth, and so on. And I think as you grow older, you do read it more as tragedy, more as melancholy, more as that sense of loss. Whereas a child, you're not necessarily seeing that.
Mm-hmm. I have an extreme dislike for things ending, and I completely blame Tolkien for scarring me as a child.
Because you've got like 10 endings, and yeah, and the last one is just
Yeah, and it just drags on.
And the last one is just so powerful. Yeah.
So the last question I have for you today is, do you have any Tolkien projects that you're currently working on or that have recently released that our audience can look out for?
Okay. Well, I mentioned Something Has Gone Crack, that new perspectives on Tolkien in World War I. That just came out from Walking Tree. It's available on Amazon. Haven't gotten feedback on it yet, but I think it's going to be a pretty good one. We've got some pretty exciting papers in there. The new issue of Mythlore just came out. It's not. There's actually a fair amount of stuff on Rover Random in it, which is interesting. Doesn't get a lot of attention, but this particular issue is about children's literature, and Rover Random sparked a couple of good papers. So I recommend looking at that. Now, my own next Tolkien-related projects are pretty different, though, from things that I've done in the past. For one of them, my co-author and I are looking at an intriguing case of parallel motifs in Tolkien's The Lost Road and an unpublished novel by Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter. So we're trying to look at what's the mythic framework here. Why are they both, why are we having this kind of convergent mythology where they're both talking about these same sort of things? so we're kind of wrapping our heads around that. That's for a paper for a conference in February. So by the time this is broadcast, we hope we have it figured out by then. And then the other project is I'm co-editing a special issue of the Journal of Tolkien Research on Tolkien and Joss Whedon. Now, it doesn't sound necessarily like it would go together, but Chris Larson and I have got a number of really interesting abstracts for this, and we're looking forward to getting the completing papers in December and getting that out in the spring. My own paper for this is continuing my recent work on the Ferian drama structure in Tolkien's work, which I've already applied to an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and here I'm going to be looking at the horror film Cabin in the Woods.
Wow, both of those projects sound fascinating, and I can't wait to get my hands on them. I want to thank you so much for being a part of the interview with me. It's been great to hear your story and to learn a bit more about your scholarship and the ways that you help shape kind of the field of Tolkien research. And again, I'm just so grateful you could join me today.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed doing this.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We have a lot of fun making these podcasts.
So much fun. It's always exciting to talk to fans and scholars about their Tolkien experience.
If you want to know more about the ways to connect with this episode's guest that they mentioned in this interview, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. Also, don't forget to follow the podcast on your favorite social media sites.
That's right. We're on Facebook as Tolkien Experience and also on Twitter as @TolkienEXP. So don't forget to like, follow, share, and comment, because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking with our guests. You can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I am @LukeB.Shelton.
You can also look for me on Twitter, where I am @AaronLPalmadill. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.